There's a pretty one, Ulysses. There it is.
Well, hello BookTube, I'm Sean the Book Maniac. Welcome back to my channel. Here I am with another Outdoor Friday Reads. I didn't think this was going to happen. It's about just before 2 p.m. Again, I'm late. It's been a weird day. I'll explain a little bit about that in a minute. It hasn't started raining yet. Maybe you can tell by the lighting that it's a bit of it's an overcast day. Not only overcast, we are expecting a typhoon of historic proportions, the largest typhoon ever to hit the country since these things have been recorded, in the next 36 hours or something. And it's supposed to start raining. It was already supposed to start raining. I am tempting fate to be out here, but that it's overcast, I can try this new location in the park, and maybe the Japanese people are all scared of the typhoon, so it'll be empty, and it's completely empty. I'm the only person in the park, but it's not raining. So let's see. If it starts raining on me, I'll have to rush back with all my shit and finish it at home. But anyway, maybe I'll be lucky. First of all, I'm feeling better, thank you. The pills worked, so I'm fine. Enough about that. I was scurrying this morning to buy enough groceries to last Kenji and I for the weekend. The supermarket opened at 9 a.m. and so instead of doing my Friday reads, I was kind of focused on that. And by the time I got the groceries, I had to end up going to 2 different stores because the yakisoba noodles at the first one weren't the ones I liked. So, in case of emergency, the princess has to have her way in all things. So that took more than an hour. And then I was tired, so here I am. Several hours later, yes indeed, they say that this typhoon is going to be crazy. I have experienced many typhoons since I've been in Tokyo for the past decade. None of them, the very last one was a little scary, not where I was, but 40 or 50 kilometers away. A lot of property damage and power outage. Nobody was killed, but people do die in typhoons. So I don't want to alarm anyone. I'm fine. I live on the second floor of a very well-constructed, very modern building. I don't think it's going to blow over. I don't think the windows are going to blow out. And I just hope the power doesn't go out because then I can't watch BookTube. But no, I think it'll be okay. I'm relying on Kenji 100% to follow the news on the TV, and if there's any evacuation orders, I have no idea. The one typhoon that I remember, maybe the first one that I ever experienced, the only one that I truly experienced in that I was outside walking when it hit. I was walking home, it was a summer night, or hot evening, about 6 o'clock at night. The sun was shining, and I was walking home in shirt sleeves. And huge raindrops started falling so slowly, and I just remember being struck by how they just plopped onto the ground. That's weird. And there was just a few plop, 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 and within 20 seconds, it went from that to just the most torrential, heavy rain that I've ever been out in my life, and a wind came up that destroyed my umbrella. The umbrella lasted 12 seconds and then it blew off down the road. And I thought I got so wet so fast, and the wind was so strong that I thought that it was going to tear my clothes off my body. And sorry I wasn't vlogging back in those days, but no, it didn't happen. But it was like, holy, these things can be powerful. A typhoon is a hurricane, right? So I'm a little worried, but I don't want anybody to worry about me. Kenji will protect me. We'll protect each other. It'll be fine. At least half of the time when we get a typhoon warning, they can't really predict, just like hurricanes, they can't really predict where they're going to go. So I wouldn't be surprised if it either fizzles out or, goes a different direction. But the forecasts say epic, incredibly dangerous typhoon. So it should be interesting. All right, enough about unimportant stuff like the weather. On to the books. I have one bail, so you haven't heard me talk about this for a long time. On August 20th, I started this book and I bailed on it last Sunday. Anniversaries by Uwe Johnsen. There's a longer title, which I won't give because I can't pronounce it. This was a buddy read. This is only volume 1. Translated from the German by Damien Searles. This was a buddy read with Peg of Peg the Book Prize Addict, and we did it for about 6 weeks, I guess. It's a novel written in the form of daily journal entries. And so we read an entry a day corresponding to the day in 2019, which is why we started it on August 20th. We checked it in with each other every Sunday. Now, it's heavy. I'm going to put it down for a minute. It wasn't very good. There was moments of brilliance, but it was so scattered because what the author was trying to do was tell the story of the protagonist. She was a single mother, German national, living in New York City with her 11-year-old daughter. But she was remembering the stories that had been told to her about the lives of her parents in Nazi Germany. And that backstory was really interesting, but the novel didn't narrate that story very often, not every entry. What was in every single entry, and which became one of the faults of the novel, is that each entry is at least partially, and sometimes either largely or completely, a summary of the day's news as reported on that day in the New York Times. And occasionally the protagonist, the single mother in New York City in 1967, her reaction to the news, but mostly just a summary of the news. And, you know, this is a 1,700-page novel, and probably 1,000 pages of it are about what happened in the news each day of the year. That's just lazy-ass bullshit. I'm sorry. It should be a 700-page novel, if that. And who cares? Readers that are smarter than me would feel more of a resonance between what her parents were experiencing in Nazi Germany, her parents and grandparents, and things that were happening in 1967 in America and in Europe that were as reported in the New York Times. But come on. It's like how we all used to write our essays in high school. Just pasting in filler. It didn't add anything. When he actually wrote, instead of just a lazy précis of the day's news, he was a good writer, and there were some beautiful set pieces. But sporadic, and because each entry was so different than the last one, there was rarely a flow. You know, maybe she would pick up the story of her parents and grandparents 3 or 4 days later, but by that time I'd read all this New York Times summary bullshit. I didn't remember anything. And it got to the point in the last week and 2 weeks that Peg and I were both having the same experience, that we couldn't remember anything the next day that we'd read the day before. Like, it was just so disjointed. So I was a little sad about it, because it was a really easy to, start my day and read this page and a half, sometimes 2 pages for that day's entry. But it just didn't feel like nothing was sticking for me, and nothing was really accumulating of value. And I just started to resent this preoccupation with what was reported in the New York Times as having any literary value to me as a reader. No, it didn't. So I bailed. I have finished 4 books. And only one of them was awesome. I finished this the day after last Saturday. A writer of books by George Paston, the pseudonym of Emily Morse Simons. I don't know why I was saying Simmons last week, but I think I've always known her uncle was John Addington Simons. Not very good. 3 stars. The female novelist who was the protagonist of this novel was preoccupied by some very interesting issues. But being preoccupied with issues does not a novel make. And I thought it was a very unsuccessful novel that had a lot of interesting issues in it and not very fully realized characters. So it was a delight to do the buddy read with Sharon Goforth, and I didn't enjoy the novel. I have also finished this debut novel by Sanjeev Sahota, Ours Are the Streets. And unfortunately it wasn't very good either, but I don't feel as disappointed when an author's debut or earlier work is no good when I have already read and loved a later work. So that's the situation here. I loved his The Year of the Runaways, one of my top reads of 2017. And so I was really curious about his debut. I hear raindrops. Well, yeah, it's starting to rain. Is it gonna pass? Let me wait. I gotta get my microphone covered up and my books covered up before it rains too hard. So, yeah, it's raining. I gotta pack all this shit up and go home. See you in a minute. Jesus Christ. I'm back. And I'm sweaty, but I didn't want to take the time to wait until I stopped sweating, so you're just gonna watch the sweat evaporate off my cherubic face. So where was I? I was talking about having finished the debut novel by Sunji Sahota, and I loved his second book, The Year of the Runaways. This wasn't very good. It wasn't awful, but he went... 2016 was the second novel. This was originally published in 2011, so in 5 years, he developed his literary talents tenfold. This is a first-person narrative about a would-be suicide bomber. A British Muslim guy who goes back for the interment of his father's body in Pakistan when he's about in his early 20s, and he leaves his wife and infant child at home, goes to Pakistan with his mother, and he becomes radicalized. I didn't buy it. I didn't learn. There was nothing in here that I hadn't already read in 20 years of newspaper articles about the radicalization of Western Muslim men. I wasn't convinced by it. I didn't feel any sympathy for him. Was I supposed to? I didn't feel anything. The characters, he was not a deeply realized character, so the story just fell flat. There were moments, paragraphs here and there of beautiful writing, beautifully descriptive writing about interstates and environment that I gasped at, but they were few and far between. So that's what he built on, and the characters in his second novel just jump off the page. Here, that didn't happen, so I didn't like it. I might as well do the third one that I didn't like, and then we'll end on a positive note. Late last night, I finished Griselda by Alice Deal, and it wasn't very good either. So both, I don't think I ever said. This was a 3-star read, and so was Griselda. The first thing is, this was volume 1 of a 3-part novel, and it was only about 150 pages. I'm not going to read the next 2 volumes, and I'm going to count. This one is 1 book, because it is a book. So, yeah, the writing wasn't very good, and the character development was non-existent. I was told a handful of interesting facts about each character, but that doesn't round out a character in the slightest, of course. It had a scaffolding of plot that was a bit melodramatic, and then no character development, so no, I have no interest in reading further in this novel. So I've read 2 obscure Victorian novelists. Probably my working theory now is that most obscure novelists are obscure because they don't have any talent, right? But there's a few gems. Like last year I discovered Charlotte Young. More about her a little later in this episode. That's not the case with her. She's an excellent writer. But what do you think? I'd like some comments. My working theory now is that most obscure writers are obscure because they're not very good. Please comment below. Okay, the highlight of my reading week was the buddy read of Wuthering Heights by Emily Bronte with Britta. We finished it yesterday. I loved it so much. I can't believe how much I had forgotten. I think this is my favorite 19th century novel. I just couldn't remember why I loved it. So now that I've read it, I do know why I loved it. It is unlike anything else published in the century in terms of the modern tale, the modern character development, and the bold. And so I was just saying that there was a kind of a melodramatic plot that was scaffolded on not much character development, or did I invert that? Anyway, here the characters are so three-dimensional that the bizarre story is not bizarre at all. It just coheres perfectly. In the last few years, I've read her sister's writings, and I read Jane Eyre, and I'm sorry, I gave it 5 stars, but it was kind of peer pressure. It's only since I came to BookTube that I kind of got rid of peer pressure, because the more I think back on that, I couldn't stand her, Jane Eyre. Rochester was interesting, but she was kind of... Agnes Grey was just embarrassingly bad. This is a masterpiece, a work of art. Team Emily, as Sharon of Sharon Goforth says, Emily kicked butt. There were so many things that just fascinated me. The force field between the two houses, Wuthering Heights and Thrushcross Grange, and the keys and the locks and the rooms, and how people in either house were always struggling to find a room or enter a room or exit a room, how much of a challenge it was in a way I don't remember reading in any satisfying novel ever. And the physicality, I think I'm probably stealing from Britta, the physicality, the brutishness of this novel was just wonderful. Such a breath of fresh air with all the dainty doily blah 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 blah. This was just, and the pinching and scratching is, and the dogs. I mean, I don't like dogs, but the dogs attacking. There was something symbolic. The image of that was really powerful. The way it ran to the novel. There's just so much to be fascinated by. And a new subscriber, a new booktuber. Can I remember her channel name? I will put it here. She teased me when I mentioned it maybe last week. Oh, it was on my Victober TBR video. She said, Sean, the book maniac, I don't like ghost stories. You know, this Twitter thing that's going around. Also, Sean, the book maniac, I love Wuthering Heights. And I mean, I had forgotten there were ghosts. But the ghosts, who cares about the ghosts in this story? That had nothing to do with what this book was about. I believe that one or two of the characters in the story believe ghosts, but I did not need to believe ghosts to enjoy the story. So, there. This is just the best novel published in the Victorian era. I'm picking the book up because this is, again, Britta. This is in reaction to a lot of comments that Britta made as we were both being wowed by this novel, but not really of the Victorian era. There's something that's more modern about it. It's just a one-of-a-kind literary masterpiece. I can't wait to reread it, maybe next month. Nellie, I am Heathcliff. So those are the books that I finished. And I have started one. I have started a Charlotte Mary Young novel, and I'm barely into it. I think I'm partway through chapter 2. The Carbonels by Charlotte Mary Young. And it's starting out just wonderfully. Like the one that I finished late last night, Griselda. I mean, the prose was just really, it was a mess. And the prose is so tight and lively. I mean, the opening scene, it's a newly married couple. Edmund has married his second cousin, and they are setting up a house in a rural estate that he has recently inherited. And her younger sister is living with them. So they're all named Carbonell. The surname is Carbonell. And the opening scene is that the workers are scrambling to finish the renovations and everything so they can move their stuff in. And one of them notices that one piece of wallpaper had been pasted on upside down. And Mr. Carbonell was so incensed, and he was scolding the head workman and said, "Find the last piece of wallpaper. I ordered enough. I want it to be replaced." And then they couldn't find it. Everybody is so worked up, and there's a class dynamic to that scene, but also in a kind of about an amusing topic that you don't expect to find in a. For me, it just was refreshingly funny. Like it was kind of like a sitcom problem in a late 19th century novel. I really enjoyed the way it opened. So, more on that later. I am doing this as a really casual, relaxed buddy read with Lindy, my friend Lindy, who has been on my channel. Because she's heard me talk about it in the TBR, and she found it, maybe ebook or something. And she didn't suggest a buddy read because she knows that I'm usually swamped with buddy reads, and she and I have a buddy read starting in December. She said she was going to start it this week, and I said, well, I'm going to start it this week too, so let's just check in with each other and put the little label about what chapters we're talking about, but no pressure to stick to a schedule, or just very casual. So we haven't checked in with each other because it's just started today, but great. And in terms of what's coming up next week, Even though I might not finish everything by the end of October, I am going to try to fit one more from my TBR in. So I will be starting it maybe later this weekend. George Meredith's novel, Diana of the Crossways. I've talked about it a few times. It's the Chunkster, 400 pages, and I'd like to try it. So that's the only one that I'm planning to start in the next week. All right, that's it. Don't worry about me too much. I'm sure everything will be fine. And what are you up to reading-wise or otherwise this weekend? Thanks for watching.